you have in all cases of any organism, and that's ultimately even though a society of buildings, of governmental structures, of law and order, etc., is something that isn't living, right? These are not, these things don't live without us. They exist because we exist. And you can have, just like you can have a relationship with a non-white person at work that is a wonderful. You could be friends. You could get along very easily. The reason why that works is because you all know that you're going to be able to escape that scenario at any point that you want. So you can have a temporary situation where you can mesh a bunch of people together. You're doing that right now in Northern Virginia. You have more than just this number of people, or number of different peoples in Northern Virginia than you just named here. And yet these are anomalies, because we see that throughout the history of the world, no multiracial, and that's another important thing I want to point out, no multiracial scenario has ever survived, has ever worked for any period of time. If they did work, they would have come down to us as successful. They don't work. The only reason they work is for a time, briefly for a time, just like is happening in Europe today. I mean, you can name these countries, but you could also name America. You could also name Italy. You could also name any of these places that have multiracial environments and say, look, they're working. That's like looking at the cancer patient that's not yet dead and saying, look, he has cancer, but he's not dead. He's not dead yet. So isn't cancer fine? No, cancer is not fine, because we can see where cancer goes. We can see where multiracial society goes. And the reason why, for example, a multiracial society in the West can function for the time that it does is because you don't have multiple groups with numerical courage who begin to exert their biospirits on their environment around them. You have a giant superstructure holding the people in place with an increasing level of tyranny to prevent the inevitable fighting amongst themselves, this increasing level of surveillance state, police state, etc. And you have the scapegoat, which is Western kind. Don't be mad, Mr. India from Indian, at your failures here or there. It's all the white man's fault. Don't be, don't get angry at the Pakistani who you normally have a real issue with back home, or you would normally have an issue with, because the white man is causing both of you problems today. That is the reason why. Those are some of the main reasons. Of course, there is a lot of discussion in both of those things I just stated that if we had the time we could go into. Maybe we'll do a show in and of itself and we could talk about that. But those are the main reasons why that these things work for a time, in the same way that a cancer treatment will work for a time before you're dead. And the only way the cancer treatment is successful is when the cancer is gone. So we don't have a multicultural environment. We have a multiracial environment. That's important to say. Folks, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it again and again. I cannot do your study for you. If you don't have the time to look into history and see everywhere there has been a multiracial environment throughout history, it has failed. No multiracial empire has ever blossomed into some sort of glory. It's always been monoracially. They become empires, multiracial, and they fall apart. Different rulers have tried different ways of managing different biospirits. Whether you believe we have souls or not, we are in the bodies of animals. And just like every other animal on planet Earth, we have instincts. The big differences between the races, and this is something that we in Going Free know that in the rest of the white positive sphere, they don't know. They want to talk about IQ all the time. IQ is not the difference. If the average IQ for a white person is 100, and you find a white person whose IQ is 80 or 85, that white person isn't suddenly a black person. If the average East Asian IQ is 104 or whatever it is, the A white person with an IQ of 104 doesn't become an Asian person. The difference is in the instinct. And that is a crude way of saying biospirit. That is the difference. What we manifest, what we resonate with, what we find beautiful, what sings with our soul. That is the real difference between the peoples of man. You cannot mesh them together. It's never worked. It's always temporary. And the sort of measures that governments and institutions put in place when they do have these multiracial empires are the kind of measures that we see and have always been the kind of measures that we have seen throughout history, the kind of measures we see right now, which is to scapegoat a group or two so that they all the groups can always say, well, it's those groups or that group's fault that things aren't working out and are not comfortable for me the way I want them to be, and rigid tyrannical punishment. I have seen white papers, and many of you have read them as well, from different groups preparing for the inevitable in the United States, and I'm sure the exact same has been said for all of the other Western countries about the anticipation of these governments for the, we can call it warfare, for the inevitable friction. Because once these different groups have numerical courage, once they ghettoize themselves, once they enclave themselves in enough places, and they achieve numerical courage, they will begin and have begun transforming their environments to look like them, to resonate with their biospirits. Then that sets up a cultural arms race, a biospiritual arms race. And that has always ended in a sanguinary civil war. And you can look throughout history at this happening. The different factions finally having enough numerical courage that they are fed up with the other. There's no such thing as multiculturalism. There's no such thing because that non-white person's culture that resonates with him doesn't resonate with you. And your Western culture doesn't resonate with him. And once he feels confident enough in his numbers and in the strength of his people, he's not going to put up with you anymore. He's not going to put up with your Western civilization and norms anymore. You could just look to these places across Europe, across the United States, where they have already altered everything to reflect themselves. They have their own police. Our police are even afraid to go in there. You can just look to it already happening, and it grows exponentially. And that is when things will get very violent. That is why the governments in these ruling over these multiracial environments have to continually up the tyranny to keep the peoples from fighting.